Back around 2010, I was given my first and only game console, a PSP, for Christmas by my aunt. It was not something I had asked for or even knew existed, but she gave it to me anyway. And with it, she gave me 3 games. The tower defense game Monsters Deluxe, which I never finished, the rhythm game Potapon 2, which is my favorite of the 3, and the one I probably finished the most, Cars Race-o-Rama. For those of you that don't know, Cars Race-o-Rama is the 4th sequel video game to Cars the movie. I didn't know this when I got the game. I picked up from context clues that it was a sequel to Cars, but the idea that there were 3 games that came out before it never even crossed my mind. Now, that didn't end up mattering. It's not like this game has a really in-depth story that is only understood by knowing what came before, but it probably would have cleared up my confusion about who this was. She's apparently a character from Cars Major National Championship, which was the game that came out right before this one, but to me, she was just a character that was there. I was 10, it didn't really matter to me that much. As a sequel, it's pretty nothing, but that's expected. It's a racing game. All you really need for a plot is a loose excuse to have lightning race around, and it does that. The general story is that Chick Hicks has opened a racing school that teaches cars how to race like him, and Doc Hudson is doing the same. Lightning sees this and decides he needs to prove to Chick that his way of racing, which mostly involves attempted murder and cheating, doesn't work, and what he actually needs is friendship, or something. Why anyone is joining the school of Chick Hicks, a car that famously won the Piston Cup by beating up an old man and was yelled at for it, I don't know, but I guess there will always be assholes. I don't think any of this competing racing schools or giant Radiator Springs Speedway stuff is canon in the movies because I feel like they would have mentioned them. The main campaign of the game boils down to this. There's a bunch of races in different groups. Each race is against 3 other cars, and if you get anything beyond last place, you get some stars based on your position. Though if you get anything but first place, Lightning will be upset. Get enough stars and you can race the next boss. On a course that you eventually just do on a normal race, mind you. The boss has a little pre- and post-race cutscene, and if you beat them, the next group of races opens up. There's 3 bosses, Candace, Stinger, and El Machismo, and then you race Chick Hicks, who uses the bosses to cheat, and beating him wins you the game. Simple enough. Now, if you're looking at this gameplay and going, this is not the Race-o-Rama I remember, that's probably because you didn't have the PSP or DS version. See, like a lot of games made during that time, Race-o-Rama is actually multiple completely different games, depending on which console you played. So if you played Race-o-Rama on something like the PS2, that was just a completely separate game called Cars Race-o-Rama. And unlike the PSP version, I'm pretty sure it was even open world. I'm not going to talk about that because that wasn't my childhood, but stuff like that is one of the reasons I've given up on the idea of reviewing the Cars games, because trying to deal with all that sounds like a pain. The other reason is that I don't need to embarrass myself by showing how bad I am at children's racing games any more than I already have. Now, there was extra gameplay beyond 20 races. See, each race had 6 wrenches and a postcard. The wrenches allowed you to buy upgrades consisting solely of wheels you can use to drive on water, wheels you can use to drive on metal, a bumper that allows you to smash through certain blockades, and a horn which causes tractors to fall over. You know, like in the movie. The worst of these was the magnetic tires, because at least as a kid, I kept falling off the metal paths I was supposed to be driving on. You can only have 1 upgrade at a time, along with the default power-up of boost, but it's okay because all the upgrades do is provide you with more ways to get wrenches and the ability to get the postcards, which means a lot of your time will be spent redoing races to look for wrenches or getting postcards. The postcards can be fun, but the wrenches are mostly a pain. A lot of them require you getting to a weird specific spot and needing to slow down. Do that often enough in one race and you're spending the rest of it hoping you don't get last place, because if you do, the wrenches you collected that race won't count. Though I guess that adds a bit of extra challenge to the race. Now, that's not to say it's very hard to avoid last place even when getting wrenches. I want to be very clear, I am not much of a gamer, but even as a child who pretty much only ever played 4 games, the 3 PSP ones I owned and RuneScape, I still found this this game extremely easy. Probably because I played it so much, but also because it's for children, probably younger ones than the age I was when I started playing Race-o-Rama. But even still, this game has two difficulty settings, normal and champion, and unlike every other game I've ever played, I would often pick champion just to have some kind of challenge. Though, in a weird way, normal ended up providing me with more challenges, though most of those were self-imposed. See, there were some maps that didn't require any power-ups to get all the wrenches, or the wrenches did require power-ups to get, but the postcard required the same power-up or just required the boost upgrade. Whatever the case, sometimes you'd be able to technically only do the race once while getting everything the race has to offer. But because I had to go out of my way to get the wrenches, this usually wasn't possible for me in champion mode. Even in normal mode, it was still difficult, and even as an adult recording the visuals for this video, I had to try multiple times. You know, sometimes an adult man struggles to play a children's game. The upgrades also gave me other things to do. See, I played this game so much that eventually I got bored of just beating it all the time, so a lot of the time I would just start exploring. Despite there being 20 races, there's actually only 7 maps. The maps were used to create the different races by blocking off certain parts of the road, but that didn't mean you couldn't access the blocked off areas as long as you weren't interested in winning any races, which meant you could do some exploring, even if that exploring was really you just going to places you could access in a different race. The biggest help to this was the water tires. Most of the upgrades were extremely specific to certain marked items, but for the water tires, as long as there was water, you could use them to drive on it. And since most of the maps had some water scenery, you could easily use them to mess about. And while most of those were just exploring, my favorite thing to do was cut through half a race. There's a map that has this pond in the middle of it, and in one race, there's even wrenches in it. And in that race, there's a shortcut right next to the pond. One that you don't have to use the pond to access, but you can. That pond and the roads next to it are still in other races, so when you look at this race, sure, the road to the shortcut is blocked, but nothing's stopping you from driving into the water to get to it, which is exactly what I did. Essentially, skipping half a lap 3 laps in a row. Sure, on the first lap, you do have to drift a huge amount just to get enough juice to use the tires, so you would be in last place for a little bit, but once you did it, you were far ahead, and because there's a long stretch right after the skip that allows for great speed, and driving fast also builds up the tires, you only have to do that once. Now, this shouldn't have worked. There is a wall on the other side of the skip, but I assume so players wouldn't get stuck somewhere like that. It was only a one-way wall, which meant you could easily drive through it from behind. I loved this skip as it made me feel like I had broken the game a little bit. And what better thing to do when you've done everything else the game has to offer? And it was also the only way I was ever able to lap anyone, which was fun. No, I didn't become a speedrunner. That's way too much work. Even though, looking at speedrun.com, no one seems to do the PSP Race-o-Rama speedruns. Nope. But what were those postcards even for? Well, to open up the second half of the game, or the post-game, if you will, because they're postcards, of course. See, each postcard opens up that race map in postcards, which gives you 4 more things to do per race, and boy is it certainly more content, though saying it's 4 new things is being pretty generous considering one of those 4 things is just the race again, and another one is a time travel, which is pretty much just the race but without anyone else there. The third challenge is the drift challenge, which forces you to drift a certain amount of time in 1 lap, which is a bit of a pain because none of these maps give you good opportunities for that much drifting, which just means drifting in weird places until you have enough and then just normally driving through the rest of the lap. The fourth is probably the most interesting. The idea is that you have to knock down green cones while avoiding red cones. Red cones don't make you lose, but for each red cone you knock down, you lose the points you gain from hitting the green cones. And since it's a time challenge, technically this one could have been an interesting challenge for speed and precise driving. And it was. It doesn't mean I liked it, but it is interesting. I never really enjoyed these challenges, but completing them unlocked new paint jobs and, more importantly, new characters to play as, which was a lot of fun. I mean, who doesn't want to race as Doc Hudson or Chick Hicks student? Of course, even this had a problem, which I remember being annoyed by as a kid. None of the other characters feel as good to race with as Lightning. Each character has 3 stats: speed, acceleration, and handling, and Lightning is even across the board, which, at least for this game, felt like the best option. As a kid, I couldn't even beat the races with some of the other characters, proof that I have gotten better with age, and sometimes even characters that had the same stats as Lightning felt worse, like Doc Hudson, who I played as anyways, simply because he was bigger so his handling felt worse. Some characters were just objectively worse, like Stinger, who has the same stats as Lightning, except he just has less speed. I guess it was a fun novelty. In playing the postcard events for this video, I realized they're a bit of a mess. Sometimes you would unlock a paint job for a character before even unlocking the character. The races were also rather inconsistent in what they removed. They would usually remove the barriers you would need the bumper upgrade to break through, since you wouldn't be getting any of those upgrades in the postcard events, except sometimes the barriers were still there. Some races in the story had a third lap effect that would change the course in some way, but the postcard events just had everything the same for all 3 laps. On one race, that would mean the third lap path being open the entire time, and on the other, it would mean it being closed the entire time. Though, weirdly, in the one where the third lap course was closed, it was open for the time trial, but there was still a temporary barrier in one of the exits that you could just drive through. Hazards like tornadoes and falling rocks were removed for the postcard events, except in the instance where they weren't. It feels like they forgot some things. One of the funniest parts of these challenges was that for all but the race, whoever you were playing as seemed to turn off their engine as soon as they passed the finish line, because they would often slow to a stop and then just start rolling backwards. The final thing Cars Race-o-Rama had to offer was Mater's Tall Tales, one which you could unlock from beating Chick Hicks, and one which you unlocked after getting a certain number of gold trophies from postcards. And, a fun fact about this part of the game, this was my introduction to Mater's Tall Tales. I knew very little about cars at this point. I'd probably watched the first movie, but the second one hadn't even come out, and I certainly didn't know that Mater's Tall Tales existed. So for me, these were 2 random mini-games that had nothing to do with anything. The first is based on Tokyo Mater, specifically the scene where Mater and Lightning drive through a half pipe and some cranes accidentally knock over some oil barrels and pipes. And indeed, that's pretty much exactly what the minigame is. You play as either Mater or Lightning and try to get the fastest time driving through the pipe, though it does add some other random obstacles to avoid. The second is based on Mater the Greater, you know, the one where Lightning dies, and specifically it's based on the stunt that killed Lightning, though they don't have the guts to kill him if you don't manage to get over the canyon. The idea is you boost down and up a ramp and jump over Carburetor Canyon and then try to land where you would get the max amount of points. And of course you can play as Mater or Lightning. I think they should have had you try to jump Carburetor Canyon and success is just surviving, but I'm not a game developer. I'm pretty bad at both of these, especially the Mater the Greater one, so that's fun. And that's all the game had to offer and everything I have to say. I know I've been complaining a lot about this game, but it is a pretty fun game, and it does the one job it needs to do pretty well, which is let you race as Lightning McQueen. Considering how much I played it as a kid, I clearly enjoyed it a lot. And even with all the issues I have with it, I do have to say, that title music is fantastic.